In the deep silence of space, a small planet floated far from the busy stars. It was cold, quiet, and forgotten. The people there lived simple lives, but something had changed. The lights in their homes had gone out. The air felt heavy. The water moved slower than before. They could feel it. Something was wrong. Among them was a young alien girl named Luma. She was small and curious, with soft blue skin and large golden eyes. She lived in a quiet village at the edge of the planet. Her parents used to tell her stories about the stars and the brave ones who flew between them. One name always came up in the stories: Earth. But Earth was far away, and nobody had heard from it in many years. Some said it had vanished. Others said it had gone to sleep. No one really knew. Still, Luma believed the stories. One evening, as the skies turned dark purple, Luma stood on a hill near her village. She held a tiny machine in her hands, an old communication pod from the days when her people still spoke to the stars. It was small, round, and glowing weakly. Her hand shook as she pressed the button. "Hello," she said softly, hoping someone was listening. "This is Luma from the planet Orica. We need help. Please, if you can hear me. We don't know what to do. We are alone." The message flew into space. It was quiet. There was no reply. She stayed there a long time, staring at the sky. Then she walked home with slow steps. She didn't tell anyone about the message. No one would believe her. No one believed in help anymore. Far away, across stars and silence, Earth floated like a blue gem in the black sky. Long ago, Earth was full of energy. Its people had helped others in need. But something happened, something quiet and strange. Earth had pulled back. The humans had stopped talking to the galaxy. They turned inward and closed their doors. The galaxy moved on without them. But not everyone on Earth had forgotten. A few watchers still listened to the stars. Deep under the surface of Earth, in a quiet room full of blinking lights, an old man named Director Keen sat in front of a wide screen. He had listened to space for many years. Every day, the machines gave him numbers, sounds, and silent data. But today, something different happened. A soft beep. He looked up. Then a voice came through. A clear, small voice. "This is Luma from the planet Orica. We need help." Director Keen leaned closer. He played the message again. The words were simple. They were not full of fear. They were full of hope. That made them powerful. He did not smile. He did not speak. He just listened to the message again and again. Soon, others in the quiet building gathered around. Engineers, watchers, readers. They listened too. No one said a word for a long time. Then Keen stood up. "Record the signal. Trace the origin. Wake the council." The room moved fast but stayed calm. Something had changed. The Council of Earth had not met in a very long time. They had become watchers instead of doers. But now, in a bright room high above the clouds, they sat around a wide table. The message from Luma played again. The room stayed silent after it ended. Finally, one voice spoke. "Why now? Why her? Why Orica?" Another answered, "Because someone still believes in us." They listened again. The message repeated. The child's voice was soft but clear. "Please, if you can hear me, we don't know what to do." Earth had not answered a call in many years, but this one was different. It was not a request for power. It was not a demand. It was just a cry, honest and pure. And Earth heard it. The council looked at each other. No vote was needed. No delay was taken. The answer had already come. "Prepare the ship," someone said. "Earth will go." In space, the message from Luma kept moving. It passed stars, moons, and dust. It passed worlds that did not care, but Earth had listened. And now, it was waking up. Back on Orica, Luma sat by her window. She looked up at the sky and wondered if the stars had heard her. She didn't know that far across the galaxy, a ship was already warming up. Quiet engines were beginning to hum. Plans were being made. Eyes were looking outward again. One cry for help had reached a sleeping world, and Earth had decided it was time to rise. The ship was old, but its heart was still strong. It had waited in silence under Earth's sky, buried deep beneath silver clouds and forests that had grown tall over time. No one had touched it in years, but it had not forgotten how to fly. The engineers walked quietly around it. They didn't speak much. They checked the systems. They cleaned the outside. They ran light through the wires. The ship responded with a slow hum, as if waking from a long dream. Director Keene stood nearby, watching. His hands were behind his back, and his eyes were sharp. He didn't need to say anything. The others already knew what to do. Up in the skies, satellites turned to look toward the planet Orica. Machines studied the message again, measuring every word, every sound. Earth had many tools, but it had not used them like this in years. Most of the world did not know what was happening. Life on the surface was quiet, but under the ground and in the sky, something new had begun. The Council of Earth met again in secret. They looked at the map of stars and saw the location of Orica. It was far, near the edge of the known paths. That made it difficult. That made it slow. But that also made it important. One of the council members, a quiet woman with silver in her hair, asked a question. "Do we go only to help the girl, or are we going for something more?" Another answered with calm words, "We go because someone believed in us. That is enough." And so the decision was made without much noise, as all important things are. The crew was chosen. Not soldiers, not fighters. These were thinkers, helpers, speakers, people who had once gone to other worlds to build bridges, to share ideas, to listen, and to teach. Among them was a young man named Aaron. He had been born after Earth had turned quiet. He had never seen another world, only heard stories. But he had always wondered about the stars. When he was chosen, he packed his bag slowly. He took only a few things: a journal, a book of star names, and a small plant from his home. As the ship rose above the clouds, no music played. There were no cheers, no waves from the crowd. The launch was quiet, soft, almost like a secret. But in that silence was something strong: the return of purpose. While the ship moved through space, Luma walked the dusty paths of her village. The days were longer now. The air was thin. People stayed inside more. The machines that brought energy were slowing down. Still, no one panicked. They were used to small, careful living. But Luma looked at the sky each night. She thought about her message. She wondered if it was lost in space, or if someone had caught it. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't want to give them hope unless she was sure. One night, a small blinking light appeared far above. It was not fast. It didn't flash like the silencers machines. It was steady. She stared at it for a long time. She thought maybe it was a star, or maybe something else. The next day, she went to the edge of the village. She sat on a rock and listened to the wind. It was quiet, but something about the silence felt different. It was not empty. It was waiting. In space, the Earth ship passed frozen moons and quiet rocks. It moved carefully, watching and learning. Aaron sat by a wide window, writing in his journal. "She spoke to us," he wrote. "A girl across the stars. Not with fear, but with belief. That is the most rare thing. Someone who still believes in help." He thought about what Earth had become, so full of tools, ideas, and history, but it had become silent. The silence wasn't because of danger. It was because of doubt. People had started to think their help didn't matter anymore. But now, one message had changed that. The ship entered a soft path of light. It was close to Orica now. They could see the shape of the planet, small, pale, and wrapped in slow-moving clouds. It looked tired, but not lost. Inside the ship, the crew gathered in a circle. They shared tea. They shared old stories about the days when Earth helped other worlds. Some had seen it. Some had only heard about it. But all of them felt something new growing inside. Luma sat under the blue tree near her home. She looked up at the sky again. Far above her, the ship from Earth began its slow approach. It did not come with noise or fire. It came like a gentle wave, steady, calm, and full of quiet strength. Earth had not returned to lead. Earth had returned to listen. And that was the beginning of everything. Luma could feel the air change that morning. The wind had a different smell. The trees around her village seemed to sway just a little more gently. She walked out into the open fields and looked up at the sky. The stars were still there, of course, but there was something new, something she couldn't quite explain. The light was different, brighter in a way that made the darkness feel less lonely. For the past few days, she had watched the sky more than usual. The feeling in her chest, that feeling of something close, was growing stronger. She could not explain why, but she knew something was coming. Something important. Maybe it was just a dream, maybe just hope, but Luma could not shake it. The small village she lived in had always been quiet. The people didn't expect much. They worked hard each day to keep their lives simple and steady. But for weeks now, the machines that powered their homes had been slowing down. The energy from the wind and the water wasn't enough anymore. They were running out of the one thing they needed to keep their world alive: power. Luma's parents told her not to worry. "We'll find a way," they said. But Luma knew they were only saying that because they didn't want to frighten her. They had stopped trying to fix things. They had accepted their fate quietly. But Luma wasn't ready to give up. That night, the stars seemed even more distant. The darkness spread over the land like a blanket, thick and heavy. Luma walked to the edge of the village, where the hill met the sky. There she sat alone and stared up. She thought back to that first moment when she had sent her message into space. It felt like a lifetime ago. She wondered if anyone had heard it, if anyone had listened. Suddenly, a small light appeared in the sky. At first, she thought it was just another star, but it wasn't. It moved, slowly but steadily, across the sky. It wasn't like anything she had seen before. No ships from the silencers, no strange lights from the dark corners of space. Just something new, something peaceful. The light grew closer, and her heart began to beat faster. She stood up from the rock where she had been sitting, unable to take her eyes off of it. It was not just a star. It was something else. Back on Earth, the crew aboard the ship had grown quiet. They had crossed many light years, but Orica was still far away. Yet, even in the stillness of space, they felt something shifting. Aaron sat in front of the screen, looking at the images of the planet below. He had never been this close to another world before, and even though he had studied planets for years, nothing had prepared him for the feeling of actually being here now. The planet Orica was smaller than Earth, but it had a beauty of its own. The soft glow of its atmosphere seemed to pulse, as though it were alive. But something was wrong. The light from its surface was dim, almost like it was trying to hide from something, trying to avoid being noticed. It wasn't a bright, welcoming world. It was a world in trouble. Aaron and the crew knew what they had to do. They were not here to take charge, to rule, or to fight. They were here to listen. They had come to offer help in any way they could, but there was no clear path. No one knew exactly how to fix things. No one knew what the people of Orica would want. All they could do was offer their presence, their hope, and their strength. The ship's captain, a woman named Captain Marla, stood by the large windows, watching the planet grow larger as they approached. She had been part of the Earth crew that helped other worlds years ago, but things had changed. Over time, she had come to accept the silence of Earth, the quiet retreat into itself. She had never imagined they would return like this, without a battle, without anger. This time, it was different. The message was clear, Captain Marla said to Aaron, who had joined her by the window. They need help. They have nothing left. But it's not just about power or food. It's about showing them that they're not alone. Aaron nodded. They still believe that someone will listen. That's rare. Most worlds don't hold on to that hope anymore. Captain Marla turned to him, her face serious. And it's a hope we cannot ignore. On Orica, Luma ran back to her house, her heart racing. The light in the sky was growing bigger now. She could hear it before she saw it clearly. The sound of something large, something massive moving through the air. Her parents stood in the doorway, looking up with wide eyes. They didn't say anything. They were too surprised to speak. Luma's mother put a hand on her shoulder. "What is it, Luma?" she asked, her voice soft. Luma looked at her, but she didn't answer. She could not explain what she felt. She just knew. It was Earth. The ship landed slowly in a field not far from the village. It was large but graceful, its smooth surface gleaming in the moonlight. There was no explosion of sound or light, just a gentle hum, like a song only the planet could hear. As the ship settled onto the ground, the people of Orica gathered in the distance, too afraid to approach but too curious to stay away. Luma stepped forward, her heart beating faster with each step. She was not afraid. She had waited for this moment her whole life. She had sent the message, and now something was answering. Something was finally responding. As the door of the ship opened, the first human stepped out. He looked at the people of Orica and smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of understanding, of kindness. He held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. The crew of Earth had arrived. And the galaxy had changed forever. The people of Orica stood still, their eyes wide in both fear and awe. They had seen ships in the sky before, but never like this. The Earth ship wasn't a ship of war. It wasn't a machine to control or destroy. It was a ship of peace, a message from a world they had forgotten. Luma stepped closer to the ship. The air was thick with uncertainty, but it wasn't the kind of fear that makes people run. It was a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown. She could feel it in the way the villagers whispered to each other, their voices soft and unsure. They had waited for help, but now that it was here, they didn't know what to do. The crew from Earth stepped out of the ship, each one moving with calm purpose. They wore clothes that were simple, like the ones Luma had seen in books, but their eyes were bright with something more than just knowledge. It was hope, and it shone in their every movement. Aaron, the young man who had written in his journal, was one of the first to step onto Orican soil. His boots made no sound on the soft ground, but his heart pounded. This wasn't just about finding the people of Orica. It was about answering a call that had been sent across the stars. It was about reconnecting with a lost part of the galaxy. The villagers watched, unsure. They had been isolated for so long, they didn't know how to greet strangers. But Luma, who had always believed in something more, took a step forward. She didn't wait for anyone else. She didn't wait for the villagers to tell her what to do. She knew what she had to do. She approached the humans, her small figure standing out in the crowd. When she reached Aaron, she stopped. The others watched her, but no one moved closer. Aaron looked down at her. There was something in her eyes, something pure, something full of belief. He smiled. "You were the one who called." Luma nodded slowly. "Yes, I didn't know if anyone would hear me, but I hope you would." Aaron crouched down so they were eye to eye. He didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he studied the planet around him. It wasn't the planet he had expected. There were no bustling cities, no bright lights. The planet was quiet, still, and sad. "The people of Earth didn't forget you," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "We heard you, and we are here to help." Luma's eyes filled with hope, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, letting the words settle in her heart. Behind them, the other members of the crew began to set up. They moved quickly, but without rushing, working together in quiet unity. Some of them set up small devices that looked like simple machines but were much more advanced. Others took readings of the planet's atmosphere, the power grid, and the water systems. They were already making plans, already thinking of ways to help. They were here to rebuild, to give Orica another chance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the villagers began to come closer. They had been watching from the shadows, too afraid to approach. But now, something in their hearts began to change. There was a sense of calm in the air, a feeling of peace that spread through the crowd. One by one, they stepped forward, curious, unsure but hopeful. They had seen Earth before, in stories. The people had helped others, but they had thought Earth was lost, a memory from a time long past. To see the Earth people standing there, offering a hand, it was a dream come true. Luma stayed close to Aaron, her heart still beating fast. She had waited so long for this moment. She had never imagined that someone would actually come, someone who would listen. The Earth crew worked through the night. There was no hurry, no panic. They worked calmly, making plans, sharing ideas with the villagers. One of the crew members, a woman named Maya, was talking to the village leaders. She was explaining how they could rebuild the power grid, how they could harness the natural resources without overusing them. It wasn't just about giving the planet what it needed. It was about teaching the people of Orica how to stand on their own again. Back on the ship, Captain Marla stood by the window, watching the lights of the village below. She had spent most of her life traveling through space, visiting different worlds, meeting different people. But this was different. This wasn't just about exploration. This was about healing, about restoring what had been lost. She turned away from the window and walked toward the crew. "How are they doing?" she asked Maya. "They're listening," Maya said, smiling. "They want to help themselves, Captain. They just need the knowledge, the tools." Captain Marla nodded. "Then we'll give them what they need. No more, no less." Luma had never felt this way before. As she stood with Aaron, watching the Earth people work, she felt something inside her shift. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The stars above her seemed to shine a little brighter. The wind felt warmer against her skin. The world around her wasn't just a place of survival. It was a place of hope, a place of possibility. She looked up at Aaron again. "You will help us rebuild." He smiled down at her. "We will help you build something better, together." And in that moment, Luma knew the galaxy was full of more than just darkness. There was light. There was hope. And Earth had not only answered her cry, it had come to make sure she never had to cry alone again. As the days passed, the village of Orica began to change. The people worked with the Earth crew, learning how to repair their machines, how to take care of their resources, how to make their world better. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one they would take together. They would not just survive anymore. They would thrive. And the stars, the same stars that had watched in silence for so long, seemed a little closer now, a little brighter, because Earth had returned, and so had hope. The days that followed were full of quiet change. Orica, a planet that had once felt distant and forgotten, was now alive with purpose. The villagers, once hesitant and unsure, had begun to embrace the lessons offered by the Earth crew. It was not just about repairing broken machines or finding new sources of power. It was about something much deeper. It was about rebuilding trust, about creating a bond between worlds that had once been separated by more than just distance. Luma watched it all from the hilltop every morning. The village had changed in just a few days, and she couldn't help but smile as she saw her neighbors working side by side with the Earth people. There was a new energy in the air. It wasn't the energy of machines or tools. It was the energy of hope, the kind of hope that could only grow when people worked together for a better future. The Earth crew had been patient, teaching the villagers everything they knew. Aaron, the young man who had first spoken with Luma, spent hours each day explaining the science behind the technology they used. It was not just about how things worked. It was about understanding why things worked the way they did, how they could use their world's resources without draining them. He had a way of making everything sound simple, even though the knowledge was vast. And every time he spoke, Luma could see the villagers listening closely, absorbing everything they could. But it wasn't just Aaron. Maya, the crew member who had spoken with the village leaders, had become a close friend to Luma's mother. Maya would visit their home every evening, bringing new ideas and plans, and together they would sit by the fire, discussing ways to improve the water supply, the farming techniques, and how to make sure the village didn't rely on outside help forever. It was clear to Luma that Maya believed in the people of Orica just as much as she did. The villagers had started to gather at night in the open fields. They would sit in circles, talking about the changes that were coming. At first, they had been afraid. They feared that what they were learning might be too much for them to handle. But now, the fear had turned into excitement. They were beginning to see the possibilities, and with those possibilities came the strength to create something new. Even the youngest children had started to pitch in. Luma often saw them running across the fields with small buckets, helping to gather the natural resources that the Earth crew had taught them to use. They were learning to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They were learning that they didn't have to be afraid of the future. The future was in their hands, and they could shape it. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, Luma sat with Aaron on the hilltop, watching the lights of the village glow softly in the distance. The sky above was filled with stars, and for a moment, Luma forgot all about the past, the fears, the loneliness, the feeling that Orica had been forgotten by the universe. "We've come so far," Luma said softly, her voice full of wonder. "Just a few days ago, I thought we were going to lose everything. But now, it feels like we can do anything." Aaron smiled, his eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "You were the first to believe, Luma. You called out when no one else would. You gave us a reason to come." Luma shook her head. "I only gave you the message. You gave us the hope. You gave us the chance to start again." Aaron didn't answer right away. He just sat there beside her, his eyes on the horizon, deep in thought. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees was calming, and the stillness of the night seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. They had come so far in such a short time. But even as Luma felt the warmth of hope growing inside her, she couldn't help but wonder what the future would bring. "What happens now?" Luma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Will Earth stay? Will you leave?" Aaron turned to look at her. "We'll stay as long as you need us," he said, "but you won't need us forever. We came to show you that you can stand on your own. Earth has its own challenges, but we'll always remember Orica. And we'll always be there when you need us." Luma smiled, but there was a sadness in her heart. She wasn't ready for the Earth crew to leave. She had spent so much of her life believing she was alone in the universe, and now that she knew there were others out there, people who cared, she didn't want to lose them. But she also understood. She understood that Orica had to stand on its own again, just as Earth had once stood alone. The next few days were filled with more learning, more planning, and more work. The Earth crew continued to teach, but the villagers were beginning to take the lead. They were no longer waiting for someone to fix their problems. They were starting to fix them themselves. One afternoon, as Luma walked through the village, she saw her parents working side by side with the Earth crew. They were planting new crops that would grow better in Orica's soil, crops that wouldn't just survive but thrive. Luma's heart swelled with pride. Her parents had always worked hard, but now they worked with a new purpose, a new belief that the future was theirs to shape. By the time the Earth crew had finished their work on Orica, the planet had transformed. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. There would still be challenges ahead. But Orica was no longer a world of shadows and uncertainty. It was a world full of light and potential, a world that knew it wasn't alone in the galaxy. As the Earth ship prepared to leave, Luma stood at the edge of the village, watching it lift off into the sky. Aaron stood beside her, his expression one of calm resolve. He knew this was the right time to leave. Orica could now take care of itself. "I'll never forget this," Luma said quietly, her eyes on the ship as it soared into the stars. "Thank you." Aaron smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We didn't do it alone, Luma. You were the first to believe, and that belief is what made this all possible. Remember, the stars are never far away. Whenever you need us, just look up." And with that, the ship disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind a world that had been saved not by the hands of others, but by its own belief, its own hope, and its own determination. The future of Orica was just beginning. The days after the Earth crew's departure felt different for Luma. The stars above seemed closer, almost as if they were watching over her, watching over Orica. There was no longer a sense of isolation, no longer a fear of the unknown. Every corner of the village was alive with a quiet energy, an energy that came from within the people themselves. Luma stood on the hilltop, her gaze sweeping over the land. The crops were growing strong, the power grid was stable, and the villagers, once unsure and reluctant, were now moving with confidence. They no longer relied on the old ways that had kept them in the dark for so long. The lessons the Earth crew had taught them were becoming second nature, and Luma could see the change in everyone. The village was thriving, not just surviving. But there was still so much more to do. The Earth crew had left them with knowledge, not just tools. And now it was up to the people of Orica to build on that foundation, to continue what had been started. Luma knew that the work was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like they could do it. The future was in their hands. Every evening, the villagers gathered by the fire. The flames flickered in the night, casting long shadows on the faces of those who had once been afraid to even look toward the stars. Now, they spoke of the future, of new ways to build, to grow, to learn. They shared their hopes and dreams, no longer focused on what they had lost, but on what they could achieve together. Luma was often the one to speak. Her voice had grown stronger over the past few days. She had found her place among the villagers, her place among the leaders. But she knew that she didn't have to do it alone. She had the support of everyone around her. They were all working toward the same goal. One evening, as the sun began to set, Luma sat with her mother, watching the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the cool evening breeze brought with it the scent of the crops they had planted together. "I never thought I would see this," Luma's mother said, her voice filled with wonder. "When you first told me about the Earth crew, I thought it was just a dream. I didn't believe anyone would come." Luma smiled and leaned against her mother. "I didn't believe it either. But they came. And now we have to make sure their visit wasn't in vain. We have to build something that lasts, something that no one can take away from us." Her mother nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You've always believed, Luma. That's what kept us going, even when things seemed impossible." Luma looked down at the ground, the soft soil beneath her fingers. "I just want to make sure we never forget what we've learned. I don't want us to fall back into the old ways." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "We won't. You've shown us a new way, Luma. And now we all know that we can make it." The next morning, Luma gathered the villagers together. She stood in front of them, her heart full of hope and purpose. They had all come so far in such a short time. And now it was time to take the next step. "I know you've all worked hard," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But we can't stop now. We have the knowledge, we have the tools, and most importantly, we have each other. The Earth crew gave us a chance, but it's up to us to keep moving forward, to make Orica a place where no one has to struggle, where no one has to feel alone." The villagers nodded in agreement, their faces filled with determination. They had seen what was possible, and now they were ready to build on it. Over the next few months, the village continued to grow. The Earth crew's influence could still be felt in every corner of Orica. But it wasn't just the technology they had left behind that was changing the planet. It was the spirit they had awakened. The villagers had learned that they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. And they weren't just rebuilding Orica. They were building a new future, a future that would last. Luma spent her days walking through the village, talking with the people, listening to their ideas. The children had started to gather in groups to learn from the adults. They were eager to contribute, to become a part of the new world that was taking shape. And the elders, once unsure and hesitant, had found new purpose as well. They shared their wisdom with the younger generations, teaching them how to live in harmony with the land. One afternoon, Luma and Aaron sat together in the shade of a large tree, watching the villagers work. The air was warm, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the space around them. "You've done more than I ever thought possible," Aaron said, his voice filled with admiration. "You and everyone here have built something incredible." Luma smiled. "We built it together. The Earth crew gave us the first steps, but it's all of us who've made it work." Aaron looked out over the village. "I never expected this. When we came here, we didn't know what we'd find. But now, seeing this, I know that Orica is going to be fine. Better than fine. It's going to be strong. It's going to be a place where people from all over the galaxy will look to and say, 'That's where we want to go.'" Luma felt a sense of pride well up inside her. She had always believed in Orica, but now she saw it in a way she never had before. It wasn't just a place she lived. It was a place of hope, a beacon for others. A place where people could learn, grow, and thrive, just as Earth had done. But even as she felt that pride, she knew there was still work to be done. The future wasn't perfect yet. There would still be challenges to face, challenges they hadn't even thought of yet. But they were ready. They were ready because they had learned to work together, to trust each other, and to believe in themselves. Luma stood up, her eyes scanning the village once more. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the land. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape. "We've only just begun," she said, her voice full of hope. As the years passed, Orica continued to change, growing in ways that no one could have predicted. The village that once struggled to survive was now a thriving community, filled with life and hope. The people of Orica had not just rebuilt their world, they had transformed it. The lessons from the Earth crew, and the strength of their own resolve, had created something extraordinary. Luma stood in the middle of the village, watching the people around her. Children played in the fields, their laughter filling the air as they ran through the crops they had grown together. The older villagers worked alongside the younger generation, teaching them the skills they had learned over the years. The village was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. The planet that had once been on the edge of destruction was now a shining example of what could be accomplished when people came together with a common purpose. Luma had become a leader of sorts, not because she wanted power, but because she had earned the trust of the people. She had shown them that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. She had believed in Orica when no one else did. And now, everyone else believed too. Her mother had passed on the wisdom she had always carried. And now it was Luma's turn to pass that wisdom on to the next generation. The Earth crew had left years ago, but their influence was still felt in every corner of the planet. Their teachings were woven into the fabric of Orica's society. The villagers had learned how to live in harmony with their environment, using the resources available to them wisely. They no longer relied on outside help. They had everything they needed to thrive, and they knew how to make the most of it. Luma's eyes often wandered to the sky. The stars that once felt so distant were now a source of comfort, reminding her of the journey they had taken together. The journey from fear and uncertainty to strength and unity. She had always dreamed of a better future for Orica, but she never imagined it would be like this, full of light, hope, and endless possibility. One day, as Luma walked through the village, she saw something that took her breath away. A group of children, no older than 10, were gathered around a large tree. They were holding small tools, carefully working to plant new saplings in the rich soil. Their faces were full of determination, and there was a quiet pride in the way they moved. Luma watched them for a moment, her heart swelling with pride. The children had become the future of Orica. They were not just learning the lessons of the past, but creating new ones. They were building the world they would inherit, a world that would be better than the one their parents had known. The Earth crew had given them the tools and the knowledge, but it was the children who would carry the torch forward, who would continue to grow and evolve the world they had helped to save. Luma smiled to herself as she walked over to join them. She knelt beside one of the children, a young girl with bright eyes and an eager smile. "Do you know what this tree will become?" Luma asked softly, her voice filled with wonder. The girl nodded eagerly. "It will grow tall and strong, just like the people of Orica." Luma's heart swelled. "Yes, it will. And it will help others grow too, just like you are." The child smiled, and Luma couldn't help but feel that, in this moment, Orica was truly alive. It wasn't just the land or the people that had changed. It was everything. The hope that had been sparked years ago had taken root and flourished. And now, that hope would continue to spread, reaching out to touch every corner of Orica. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the village, Luma walked to the hilltop where she had stood so many times before. The same stars twinkled in the sky above her, but now they seemed different. They no longer felt distant and cold. They felt like old friends, watching over her and her people as they built their future. Luma had always believed that Orica had a purpose, that it was meant for something greater. Now, as she looked out over the land, she knew she had been right. The planet was no longer just a place in the universe. It was a beacon of hope, a shining example of what could be achieved when people came together. And that light would continue to shine for generations to come. The villagers had learned that no challenge was too great, no problem too difficult to solve. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger. They had faced the darkness and found the light. And they had done it together. Luma knew that there would always be challenges ahead. No journey was without its obstacles. But she also knew that Orica was ready. The people of Orica were ready. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that they were never truly alone. No matter what the future held, they would face it with strength, unity, and hope. As she stood there, the wind blowing gently through the trees, Luma felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that the future of Orica was in good hands, not just her own, but the hands of everyone who had believed, worked, and fought for a better tomorrow. And so, the story of Orica continued. A story not of survival, but of growth. A story not of fear, but of courage. A story that would live on for generations to come. A story that would inspire others to believe in the power of hope and the strength of unity. For Orica was no longer a forgotten world. It was a world that had found its place in the stars. And as long as the people of Orica continued to believe in each other, their light would never fade.